Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. As your host, Nick Giordano. I hope you had a great weekend. And today I want to focus on the idea of free societies, because over the last several years, free societies have been trending towards authoritarianism. It's important to acknowledge that this trend is not new. We've observed it throughout history. In fact, Plato warned about this. He warned that all democracies ultimately end in tyranny. And our founding fathers were very concerned about this as well. It's why they implemented safeguards. However, it appears that these safeguards are starting to buckle, and part of the problem is the government and the system itself and how much power they've amassed. Part of the problem is we, the people, that haven't been paying too much attention and have allowed the government to gain this type of power. But the fact that we are witnessing this trend in nearly every Western society is particularly alarming, and we have to address this issue. It's important to curb the power of our institutions, to promote the principles that underpin free societies. And I'm talking about we have to ensure that the rule of law is respected. It's not used for political purposes like we're witnessing right now here in the United States and in other places around the world. But it also means that we have to reinforce and protect freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms. We need to ensure that there are checks and balances on the power of government. We need to promote civic education, engage in informed and constructive dialogue. We have to hold those in power accountable for their actions, especially when they use this power under the guise of protecting democracy, only to thoroughly undermine democracy. You know, the self-anointed guardians of democracy are destroying what it means to be a free society. They believe that in the name of protecting democracy, they can do whatever the hell they want. The response to the coronavirus pandemic, it was revealing, right? We've witnessed many leaders throughout the Western world use the crisis to consolidate power. And then they project. That's the amazing part. Just look at Governor Gavin Newsom going around the country, particularly to Florida, talking about how Florida is really the authoritarian state. That Governor DeSantis and Republicans are really the authoritarians, that they want to take away your rights. This is a guy that locked his state down for almost 2 years, forced people to get vaccines when they didn't want to get it, forced people to wear masks everywhere. This is a guy that wanted to destroy anyone that wouldn't comply with his little Mussolini wannabe decrees. And now he gets to go around talking about authoritarianism and how Republicans and conservatives are authoritarian. Are you kidding me? It's insulting to listen to, but people will believe him. That's the scary part. We are now living in a period where we witness those in power routinely undermining the principles of freedom and our God-given liberties. Nowhere is this more evident than what's happening in Canada. So as for today, I am going to talk to our neighbors to the north. I'm bringing in Jay Denney. Jay is a Conservative Party candidate pushing back against the Trudeau regime because he recognizes what's taking place. He knows that what's happening in Canada is truly frightening. The Trudeau regime wants to silence opposition. He wants to control speech. He wants to take away Canadians' right to protest. He wants to take away firearms. Trudeau is a guy who doesn't respect democracy. He doesn't trust the Canadian people. And I find Canada really interesting right now because as they move to curtail individual freedom, they're legalizing a lot of hard drugs, including cocaine, mushrooms, MDMA, other things. Talk about Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, right? Canadians can use hard drugs as long as they stay silent and defenseless. Take your Soma and you'll be happy. Nothing to see here, and that's what's going on. I'm looking forward to this conversation, but before I bring Jay on, make sure you follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode and visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. With that out of the way, I want to welcome Jay Denney to the PAS Report. Jay, glad you could join me. How are you today?
I am doing fantastic, Nick. It's certainly great to see you again. It's been just a month, I guess, now since we were first introduced at CPAC. Yeah, March Madness doesn't just apply to college basketball. It applies to all things in North American politics. It's been an interesting few weeks since we gathered.
It certainly has, and there's been a lot to go on. But, it's amazing because I used to mock your prime minister, back in 2018 when he used people kind instead of mankind. Mm-hmm. I would laugh and I would mock him about that. And then it turns out we now have people in the United States that don't know what a woman is. They can't answer the question. And not just here, New Zealand too, the new prime minister over there. So what is infecting the Western world that we've lost all common sense and logic? I want to know what's going on in Canada. Why have we seen this insanity play out over the last few years?
Well, I think there's a number of contributing factors to it, but it obviously it starts at the top. It starts with what we've seen as a government that is a liberal government led by Justin Trudeau that has grown tired and has certainly followed patterns of virtue signaling, has followed patterns of policy actions that don't match their words, and has followed, in my opinion, on some major economic and social issues, a series of misguided priorities. But they've been very good at finding wedge issues using, data profiling and things like that, particularly in what we know up in Canada as, you have swing states. When we talk about the Electoral College, up here it's MTV that we call it, so Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. And this is where close to half of the seats in our House of Commons are centered around, a 1 hour drive from the downtown core of those three cities. So you see policies that are increasingly, the geographic divide in Canada used to be east-west, but at least when I was growing up, it's a little bit more downtown versus out of town now. So we've seen them play that masterfully, particularly on areas of the gender fluidity issues, on climate policy, and on gun control and crime. So they've been fairly masterful, and we have people that are following it. But just as in the U.S., it's not all to blame on the left. We have our own internal divisions inside the blue tent up in Canada, the red tent down in your fair country. But the internal divisions and the internal squabbling that sometimes we turn the Gatling gun back on inside the tent. So there's a little bit of that, but at the end of the day, we're here. This is a prime minister that's been in power for 8 years, and they just have released their budget, and they keep talking about how they're doing so much for the middle class and those who wish to join it, and lifting people out of poverty. Well, they introduced this grocery rebate in the last budget, and it said 11 million Canadians will benefit from this. That's almost a third of the population that needs a partial form of the food stamp program in the U.S. So is that progress? I don't think so. So you've got
that's a great point.
So we've got a whole bunch of different issues here that, to me, all stem from a lack of common sense and leadership. I'm happy to have worked on the leadership campaign for the Conservative Party of Pierre Poilievre, who I've known since back in the university days in Calgary. And, if you go on and look at any of the videos that he's been promoting recently about bringing common sense home, bringing accountability home, bringing real justice for victims of crime home, and there's a certain level of hysteria that I think is setting in. And I don't know if COVID had a factor in that it just sort of pitted more people against one another. But you see that in all the Western nations that had these substantial restrictions on people's movements and things like that. And
we call those people the little Mussolini wannabes with their authoritarian decrees.
You can't help but wonder, when sociologists start doing their post-analysis 3 to 5 years from now, what kind of findings they're going to conjure up, because we have people that are much more divided, I think, than that, and that the discourse is on the dissent. I was just happened to be walking downtown on Spark Street, just off of Parliament Hill last week, and there was a group there that was trying to get a group photo, and they said, "Oh, can you help us take a picture?" And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Yeah, and I am Jay Denney, and I'm running for office, so gladly do you a favor." And they were all representatives from Unifor, which is a large, obviously, union a lot in the public sector as well. And so we were just having a general conversation. I was just having a general conversation about politics, and I made a comment about the gun control, and right away this guy came over, and he had his feathers up, and he wanted to argue that point. And I looked at him and I said, "See, this is the problem. See, I don't think that your opinion on it is necessarily neither right nor wrong. And in the grand scheme of things, mine probably isn't right or wrong. It's just what I believe is the proper thing for a free society. And and I just want to have a discussion about that. But right away, you've been trained either through social media or through whatever, that we can't have a civil discourse anymore, that right away any disagreement makes you an enemy of everything that I stand for. And that's not limited to just Canada. We're seeing that all over. Anyways, long-winded answer, but it is a complex question, is to try to figure out how we're at, where we're at. But yeah, there's many factors.
In Canada, like the United States, whenever the left talks about progress, getting more people on food stamps, that's progress. Whereas for conservatives, getting people off food stamps and getting them to be able to sustain themselves and take pride and work for a living, to us, that's progress. But we've seen this authoritarian shift, and it's been allowed by the people, not just in Canada, not just in the United States, but throughout the Western world, where people have willingly surrendered their rights to the government. And the government, I mean, Trudeau is one of the worst out there. When it comes to what he did when the truckers were protesting, how he targeted anyone that was donating money to the protesters, to me, that crossed the line. And then he came out with the whole gun thing. What's the mood of Canada? Now, I know you basically said it's those in the inner cities versus those outside the city areas. And that, again, that's similar to the United States. But is the sentiment that the government has gone too far, or does it seem that the majority of people in Canada are okay with it? And if they are, at what point would they say the government has gone too far?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a great, I'll send you this skit, but there's a great Canadian comedian, Glenn Foster, his name is.
Are you still allowed to tell jokes in Canada? Or?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Actually, it's another Glenn Foster bit, how he said you can't make jokes about ethnic people, but you can make jokes about ethnic food. And then he goes on to tell some ethnically charged jokes on that. But his best line, he's like, Canadians are just so apathetic. But what are you going to do? And he's like, seriously, they can raise the income tax 99% in Canada. You'd have people sitting there in downtown Toronto going, wow, it's not 100%. They better not make it 100%. I'll tell you right now, there'll be a damn revolution. And I'm going to leave, and we're going to march on. Well, I'm not going to march. I have to work. But my friends, they'll go. But we don't want to send too many people. We'll strike up a committee. We'll decide the exact proper number of people we should send 9 at a time up Parliament Hill to not cause too much of a kerfuffle and too much problem for the government. So, and you see that. Look at the huge difference when we have problems in North America, when we have issues with the government. You seldom see protests, certainly not a whole ton from the right, not in Canada, more so in the United States. But, the left will get pretty fired up. And it's almost as if the people fear, you talk about authoritarianism, it's like people fear the government. Oh, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to go down to the trucker rally. Like, I kind of want to check it out, but I don't want to get in trouble. And you look at Europe with the debate over the raising of the retirement age, and it works the other way around. Like, the government fears the people, which is the way it should be.
Well, that's what always differentiated Canadians from Americans.
And that's what Pierre Poilievre has been talking about in his speeches and in the House of Commons. And he says, we're forgetting, the Prime Minister is forgetting that we are servants of the people, not masters. The masters are the people, the common people represented by the House of Commons in Canada, which the carpet is all green to reflect the fields of Runnymede 800 years ago, right, with the Magna Carta. And we talk about flipping that pyramid on its, that the Prime Minister's at the top, and then Parliament, and then the people are at the bottom. And really, it goes the other way around. The Prime Minister gets his direction from Parliament, of which he has, a working coalition with the Socialist NDP party right now. And they get the direction from there, and those people get the direction from the people who should be at the top. And so we've kind of lost track of that, and people have allowed that to be taken away on that, or not all people, some people, and they're perfectly fine with it. It's sort of the oxymoron. People, the Canadian oxymoron that I find sometimes, you get the same people saying, oh, the government, they can't, I wouldn't trust them to run a bath. And then every time there's a social issue, why isn't the government doing something about this? You're talking out of both sides of your mouth. We are having a debate right now over whether or not dental care should be fully socialized in Canada. That's the debate that's been going on right now. Quebec has said they want to opt out. It's not really a dental plan. It's just a check being cut to the equivalent of what a couple of cleanings a year would cost the average person. But each of the provinces, the thing is you're wading into an area of provincial jurisdiction in Canada with that. Same that you have states' rights with healthcare and different things there. So it's this government trying to go through provincial jurisdiction with the enticement of money, and the provinces are happy to take it because they're in deficit too. But then the federal government comes along and is father knows best, and these are the conditions that you're going to be, spending this money on. So
Yeah, and I always find it bizarre because we can constantly empower government. Same thing in the United States. And I have to say, what used to differentiate the United States and Canada is that we weren't apathetic towards government. We constantly pushed back against government. Then somewhere along the line, we created a bunch of obedient and compliant sheep. And this is what we created. And so the new generations, they just listen to everything the government does without being suspicious or ask questions. So we're becoming more like you now in that respect. But
yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not always complacent too. It's in a sense that there's almost a veiled layer of libertarianism in the right wing. And there was a few people that I had talked to at CPAC. I did a couple other podcasts with John Stebbins to talk to a few other reporters on the whole, Nikki Haley getting mobbed there in the hallway and talking to WAPO and ABC. And then a few of them called back when they heard Biden was coming to Canada and shut this place right down. You couldn't even get around downtown Ottawa.
What was up with the menu at the state dinner? What a lousy menu.
Yeah. So the Alberta beef and what the sky. Well, it was in the aviation museum hangar, probably for security reasons because it's in the middle of nowhere, and then there's a direct route that they can shut off to easily get to the airport. But yeah, showcasing I guess Canadian agreements. But their point was they all called and I said, oh, do you want to? I said, yeah, I'm on the waiting list. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to be in Parliament for the address, but I'll be watching on TV, and here's the link where you can watch it directly, unfiltered, on parleview.ca. And they said, well, we'd like to see if you can. We'd like to get footage of the protests. And I said, what protests? I said, it's not. It's a Democrat president. I mean, so the people that are disagree with Joe Biden's policies. It's Friday. They're at work. This isn't going to be when W came here and the embassy was getting egged and mobbed. And
I remember that.
And there's a love fest for Obama. And I think at first, when he was first elected, I think it sort of straddled that both the left and right of Canadian left and right. But they were still, there was 2,200 Secret Service and other agents here. It was the security was not, they had a full sheet of bulletproof glass in front of the Peace Tower. Which is the anchor of Center Block, and probably one of the safest places in Ottawa, but still that was there. And so it's just a little bit different, and it's a little bit what am I going to protest, or what's the purpose of me protesting a president from another? And the communists were out. The communists were out protesting to get out of Cuba and Haiti and all this other thing. But I just said, unfortunately, there's not going to be any raucous footage. I don't think. Certainly nothing compared to. Oh, I thought the truckers were going to try and get down. I said, they won't be allowed anywhere near that. And speaking of the truckers, I got so fed up with the coverage that I was seeing. You had left-wing journalists basically describing this as just mayhem and chaos. I have a clip actually on Facebook of there's a couple of people walking down the sidewalk, a few people gathering, one guy banging on a drum. And the CBC commented, as we look upon Ottawa, absolute chaos descending upon Parliament. It wasn't chaos. I've seen more chaos in downtown Ottawa after the, Senators beat the Leafs in the playoffs. But on the same side, the right was downplaying it and saying that this was basically this was a Woodstock-style love-in. And the truth, of course, is always somewhere in between. So I would just walk up and down on Facebook Live, unedited, raw, just every day. I would walk back, and I'd say the atmosphere was more like the campground area of a classic rock or country music festival weekend that you would go to. It was just kind of laid back, a lot of free-flowing booze and food and stuff like that, but it was 20 Celsius below zero for most of the month, so a little bit different than...
I can't survive that.
A little bit different than the 4th of July weekend and Memorial Day weekend when those festivals are normally held. So
obviously elections different than our elections, and when we look at the current landscape, as far as Trudeau, and that's 2025, but it can happen sooner, correct? Or how does it work?
Okay, so we have a fixed election date law, which when we've had majority governments in power since Harper brought that law in, when we had majority governments, that has been followed. So the first majority government to be elected under that law was Harper in 2011, and it went to the prescribed date in October of 2015, and then Trudeau majority prescribed date in 2019. Then, just like Harper's first two terms, and now the second term for Trudeau, we're in what's called a minority parliament. So this is when no party has the majority of the seats in the House of Parliament. So quick little education fact for your American viewers, the difference here. So the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, he's first elected as a congressman, member of parliament, but the equivalent of what a House congressman would be, right? And the same with all of his cabinet are are members of parliament. And so they have double duty. They have to be there on the House floor doing their bill debates and question period every day at 2:15 in the afternoon for 45 minutes. But then they have to go back and run their departments as well. So it's an interesting system. So right now, the Liberals have a minority. They're able to get over the majority threshold with the 20 odd seats that the Socialist NDP have. That puts them over the 170 they need to get their bills passed. And then on the other side, you have the Conservative Party, who's the official opposition, who's about 30 seats behind the Liberals. And then you have the Bloc Québécois, who only have representatives from the province of Quebec, and they're the third party right now. And they sometimes vote with the Liberals, and they sometimes vote with Conservatives. But there's what is called a confidence and supply agreement. So any matters of confidence or monetary supply, the NDP have said through 2025 they're going to support that. Of course, they can pull that at any time, or the Liberals can just say we don't want to abide by this. But basically how it works in our system is Trudeau, if he decides tomorrow, hey, I'd like an election, he basically just goes to the Governor General, who is the representative of King Charles and the head of state. King Charles is the head of state for Canada.
Yeah, it's amazing. Most Americans have no idea about that.
Yeah, so it's getting weird. Like we used to have QE2. I grew up with QE2. She was the queen, and queen my whole life, and pretty much all my parents' life as well. Certainly my mother's, and almost all my father's life. And so QE2, that's what you always think of, right? Now we got KC3, and it sounds like some weird barbecue joint from Kansas, right? So King Charles III, so is actually the head of state for Canada, but he's represented in this country by the Governor General, Mary Simon. Justin Trudeau can go to the Governor General basically at any time and can request a dissolution of Parliament. And then the writ for an election would be drawn up, and we can go to an election. The Governor General doesn't necessarily have to grant that. So we had this constitutional crisis in 2008 where the Liberals, NDP, and Bloc had enough seats to form a majority themselves. And they had proposed a coalition government, and they had told the Governor General that they were ready to form a government should Harper ask for a dissolution. Instead, Harper prorogued Parliament, which basically means you shut Parliament down for an indeterminate amount of time, and then you come back and you have another speech from the throne, which is similar to a State of the Union, but not quite. And then you recommence another session of Parliament. So basically, an election could be called by the letter of the law anytime between 5 minutes from now. And it's not even necessary. The fixed date is October of 2015, the third Monday. But the Constitution does allow for a government to go into a fifth year, should they choose. And the last time that was exercised was by Brian Mulroney's government in 1993. He went past his best before date, and his party imploded, went from 167 seats to 2 seats in one single election.
I appreciate that breakdown, Jay. I mean, it is a complex system. And when you look at it, a lot of Americans don't know what takes place when it comes to Canadian politics. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I want to ask you about Trudeau and the potential for a snap election. So we'll be right back. Hang tight. Listen up, P.A.S. report audience. Experts say that China is hoarding a massive amount of food. They're soon going to have over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, over half its rice reserves, and over half its wheat reserves. But when asked about it, China lies. And one expert says that they, of course, will never admit to doing something like that. Well, what does China know that we don't? When it comes to the global food shortages, China is the canary in the coal mine. And you have to understand, China is the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed, so they can't afford to mess up. There'll be riots, civil panic, or even worse, when over 1 billion people can't eat, it's going to create a crisis for them. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for Americans like me and you? Food shortages. That's why it's a smart idea to stock up on a kit of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. It's hand-packed in the United States. The kits are compact, stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and I can attest to that because I use 4 Patriots, and their 5-star reviews on the website rave about the flavor and taste. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food by typing in the code PAS at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food. That's 4patriots.com. Use code PAS. Welcome back, everyone. And so, Jay, Trudeau called for snap elections in 2021. Do you anticipate that he's going to be doing that again? Do you see that on the horizon? I mean, I would love for him to and lose because we get rid of Trudeau that way. But do you see that happening?
So I don't right now, just because the numbers are not favorable to him. They have consistently been 6-7% behind the Conservatives, anywhere from 4 to 7%. So even outside the margin of error, the NDP are basically flat in the upper teens, where they usually always are, and they usually shave a couple points off that come election day, because the Liberals are very, very good at scaring the more moderate socialists into choosing voting Liberal instead of being handed a Conservative government. But that message gets weaker the further we go away from a Conservative government being in power. And so we have interesting voting dynamics here. So you look at Vancouver Island, for example, those are blue-orange flip voters. Like, they ignore the Liberal center. There hasn't been a Liberal MP there in, I can't remember how long, 20 years? Close to 20 years. Keith Martin, who was a reformer and then switched over to it. Because you've got people in Vancouver Island that are just anti-establishmentarianism people, and they just never vote for the government in power. As soon as one party gets in power, they vote for the other one. So it has nothing to do necessarily with ideology, because they voted for the entire island, except for one seat, was Canadian Alliance in 2000. It was further to the right of the current Conservative Party. And now the whole island is either NDP Socialist, or they have one Green Party MP there too. So not anything to do with ideological. It had to do with the disconnection, because they're so far away from Ottawa. At least that's but we did some regression tree analysis and looked at that. So yeah, Canada is a very, very, and what conservatism means in Canada, it varies based on where you live. If you're in Atlantic Canada, it's the grand old Tory. If you're in Quebec, it's the Quebec soft nationalism. If you're in Ontario, it's sort of that progressive conservative type of capitalist. And out in the West, it's a little bit more of it's populism across the prairies. And in BC, my home province, it's basically conservatism is just a flat out stand against the NDP, at least provincially, and socialist policies. So what conservatism means in Canada varies greatly where you live and at what age. So it's finding a way to bring those people all under one tent, and with the fatigue that's under Justin Trudeau's government. We're also going through redistricting, redistribution, which is the equivalent of redistricting. There, it's all completely different than what you guys have. It's all done by a federal commission with independent people, with a bunch of commissioners that were appointed just before the last election was called, quietly by Trudeau, and then he called an election and not even a press release about it. So we do it differently. The way you do your redistricting is you have your 435 seats, you figure out the population, and you adjust your population boundaries to have as close to an average as you can based on those quotients. Here we have a quotient, and then we increase the size of our house every 10 years to match that quotient. So we say there should be about 120,000 people in every district, as opposed to the 700,000 or 800,000 that you have in the States. And then that gets apportioned. So we had, when I was a kid, we had, I think, 282 members of parliament, 282 federal ridings. After the next election, we'll be up to 343. So, we've grown by 25% in my lifetime. So you talk about government bloat, but some of these districts are massive. Like, the territories and the northern parts of the prairie provinces. I mean, it's a federal district that's one federal district that's, the size of Oklahoma.
Do you think that the Canadian people are getting tired of the far left policies of the Trudeau regime? Do you think they're gravitating more towards conservatism, if for nothing else, just to have a change?
Yeah, I think the pocketbook issues are really starting to hit people. We had
and Trudeau has become the deporter in chief, right? He's kicking everyone out to America.
Yeah, well, of course, to shed no light on that, my thoughts and prayers out to the families of those people in the Akwesasne there at Cornwall and Messina, New York, there upstate New York, that there was some people trying to cross that were being apparently trafficked or aided to cross the St. Lawrence River there, and have all lost their lives. So, and then it goes the other way too. You've got government levels of government in New York State providing bus fare to people to come up to the illegal crossing at Rockland Road. So, and then you violate, because the policies on refugee and asylum seeking and the third safe country agreement clearly lay out, somebody who reports to an official crossing station. Well, they just go a couple hundred feet away from the crossing station and try to cut through the bush, and then it's an illegal entry, and then there's hearings and all of this sort of thing. So
it's been crazy. You have our sanctuary cities, the ones that have been preaching about immigrants, now shipping them up to Canada, and then Canada ships them back down to us.
Yeah, so we know we've got other things. We have issues. We've got a bit of a crime wave that's going on. I don't know if it made its way down to the U.S., but that horrifying footage of the man being stabbed to death on the patio of Starbucks in Vancouver in broad daylight, right in front of his fiance and 3-year-old kid, just for asking a guy to move away from he was vaping next to the baby, and then he gets stabbed to death. And we've had a whole pile of stabbings, and probably ever cornered Trudeau on this. And Trudeau, in his answer, started talking about how they're strengthening gun control. And Poilievre was very quick. He said, I asked about a wave of stabbing deaths. Stabbings are done with knives, not guns. And so we have a misguided policy where basically even airsoft guns, if they look like a rifle, are illegal and are going to be confiscated. The buyback program, well,
that sounds like a free society.
It's called the buyback program, but like, how are you buying it back? I didn't buy it from you. I bought it from, one of my gun dealers, like, Juan Stalls.
And are these mandatory buybacks?
So, well, there's going to be a grace period, and they're still trying to figure all this out. But yeah, if you don't comply, if you don't either have your weapon disarmed or sell it to the government or be compensated by let the government take it away, yeah, then you're in violation of the criminal code and you face jail time. So. And these are things as simple as a semi-automatic hunting rifle that can hold 4 rounds. That'll, some of those will be illegal. What I was saying before, the real problem that we have here with gun crime, and police chiefs have been pretty clear on this, is the real problem that we have with gun crime, handgun crime, and handguns have been prohibited and strictly controlled. So if you have what's called a restricted possession and acquisition license for handguns in Canada, so you're subject to a criminal record check every 24 hours, and you have to. If you're moving that weapon, like you're taking it to ranges and stuff like that, certain things, there are certain things in which you have to get permission to do that from your regional firearms superintendent before you can even do that. So handguns are legal handguns are very, very strictly controlled and are about to be completely prohibited. But the problem is that the smuggled handguns from your fair country. And so when the people say, oh, well, look what happened in Australia and the UK when they had mass shootings, they cracked down on guns and the shooting rate went down. Well, the homicide rate hasn't really gone down and starting to come back up in some of those places. You can see the clear difference between Canada and those two countries. Those are islands. Well, one's a continental island, the UK is an island, and neither of them share a 5,000-mile long undefended land border with the largest gun possessing country in the world.
And the cultures are different too. I mean,
absolutely.
Australia had hardly any homicides to begin with. So when they say, Australia's homicide rate went down by like 40%, yeah, you're talking about 30 less people per year were being killed. America has a violent culture. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's the truth. And if I could tell you now, if our government ever tried going door to door to confiscate weapons, that is not going to go down well in the United States. No. Are Canadians furious about this? Because it's not like everyone tends to think guns are like a liberal and conservative issue. It's not. A lot of liberals own guns too.
Yeah. And you'll see that, when it comes to so they did this through an order in council, which is cabinet can propose these regulations on the gun ban. There's other gun control measures that are coming in on Bill C-21, which is a gun control bill that's before the House right now. But I guarantee you they will have done the math, and there will be liberals and even a couple of the socialist NDPers who will either be absent conveniently from that vote, or who will vote against it, knowing they still have the numbers to pass it. We saw that when Harper was in power, had a minority, and the repeal of the old long gun registry that we had here, which was only supposed to cost $2 million, and ended up being billions. When they tried to repeal that, they knew they had the numbers, and so they allowed the most vulnerable members that were in more rural ridings to actually vote with the Conservatives on that bill, just so that they couldn't be used as attack ads in the next election. And they'll play the same game. You've got the 2 or 3 members up there in the territories. Be interesting to see how they vote, because you got a huge Indigenous and Inuit population up there that rely on guns to hunt for their sustenance, number one, and also number 2 for survival. There's polar bears up there. There are predatory animals up there that you need to be able to defend yourself from. But like I said, we talk about misguided priorities. If they do buy back all these guns or pay for the confiscation of the guns, let's not use their term of buyback because we didn't buy them from them. This paid confiscation is going to run into the billions. And yet, it's only a couple $100 million that's being put into border enforcement. I got my car strip searched back in November. We had a national shortage of kids Tylenol and kids cough syrup in Canada. And then a month later, every border city in the United States had the same shortage supply issue. I drove basically from Ogdensburg through Syracuse to Buffalo to a Bills game, and then came back up through Niagara Falls. I was at every CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, buying them. And they said, "Oh, you're from Canada? Well, there's a limit. Canadians can only buy one." And I had my car. I went in there. It was fully disclosed. I had $500 worth of this stuff. I hadn't been gone 48 hours. So you're only allowed to bring back $100 tax and duty free. You have to stay 48 hours. Then it goes up to 800. So I filled out all the forms. I knew that. I knew this going in. Just closed everything. Went inside. Paid my extra taxes to the thing. You start getting asked questions. Why do you have all this much? And I said, "Do you not watch the news? None of you have kids. You can't get this anywhere in Canada." And I said, "It's not, it's not for resale. If people want to reimburse me for the cost, they're welcome to do that." But I took a whole bunch to a women's shelter. I took some to the local food bank, and where these kids are being brought in, where kids attend to get food, because 11 million have to be on a grocery subsidy now. 11 million Canadians apparently. So it's designed to help out. And for all that effort, I had my car, 4 agents and a dog go through my car as if I was a smuggler. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, how many pistols just came over in these 7 other lanes while I was doing this?
It's crazy.
And so it's just another example of a misguided priority.
Well, Jay, I appreciate you coming on to speak to the audience. Hopefully sanity can reign supreme in Canada and the United States. I'd love to have you back on as things develop, particularly about the gun issue and what goes on there. Thanks for coming on. We're going to have links up at the website so that everyone can follow you. And just want to thank you again for coming on. Oh,
my pleasure, Nick. I'm happy to come anytime. I'm starting a project to talk more about the linkages between American and Canadian small c conservatism. And it's going to be called United Purple, because we're blue and you're red. And so when we meet at the border, we make purple. And we're going to claim it first, because technically you could have the inverse equation on the left, but we're going to claim small c conservatism meets at the border, be it the 49th parallel in the west or our nice meandering border along the east, that we sort of have that's the color that forms. So that's an initiative. We've got the website rights reserved. Everybody was sort of interested in it, and it's just sort of Canada is just sort of this forgotten thing. But really, when we start to see these alliances, and when you got Moscow and Beijing getting together and things like that, we sort of have to remember that great grand alliance that helped this wonderful continent through 2 world wars working together. In my mind, it's one of the greatest geopolitical neighbor partnerships on the planet. It gets a little, there's a little bit of tension and resentment up here because we seem to be the little brother, and Americans just don't care at all. But we have a common vision. Absolutely.
Jay, appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick. Have a great day. It's just slightly.
I want to thank Jay for coming on, because we all need to wake the hell up. This authoritarian push, it's not ending anytime soon. It's going to keep happening until we push back against it. It's not isolated to Canada. It's happening all over the Western world, including here in the United States. And for all those who you dismiss it, oh, that can never happen here. We'll never trend authoritarian here. Just think about all the things the government did during the coronavirus. And can you honestly say that authoritarianism cannot come here? Now, give Jay a follow. Have all the links up on the P.A.S. Report website, PASreport.com. As for Wednesday, I am working on a great episode, so be sure to tune in. As always, share this podcast with your family and friends and on social media. And if you find the podcast informative, please give the P.A.S. Report a 5-star rating and write a review on any podcast platform that allows it. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.